Hi everybody, Mark Cleghorn here for the Academy. Welcome to another live session in studio, and we brought Kelsey in today. We haven't photographed her with us such a long time, which has been a bit of a shame. But anyway, today is really not about me, not about Kelsey, but it's using the Elinchrom ONE for the very first time, in fact. The Elinchrom ONE is a studio kind of style of head. Many of you are using Elinchrom brand. You know the D-Light one. Well, basically, I'm sure that this will supersede it at some stage. The benefit of the Elinchrom ONE, it's battery powered. So in other words, even though we can kind of plug it into the mains and it'll do its job, really we can work without mains. And so that really does kind of open up where you can kind of position a light to and still have it on as it were. One of the other things that it's kind of touchscreen enabled on the back, and it comes with all the technology of any previous kind of Elinchrom head, as it were. One of the other benefits that we've got, it works in TTL mode, and that's really what we're doing today. You don't often see me shoot in TTL mode because I like consistency of exposure from first shot to last shot. But today I thought we'd actually kind of look at the power of TTL in boudoir photography when you're not quite sure what aperture that you need. You'll know that for pretty much everything that I do, I'm in a set manual flash with an exposure that has been set by me. I choose my aperture and so on. But there are times that we want to actually increase our depth of field or decrease our depth of field. So in other words, even though I probably shoot at f4 most of my life, there are times I want to shoot at 8 and 11. There are times that I want to shoot at 2.8 or less. So the benefit of TTL, of course, we can literally just turn the dial and we can allow the light to actually do the actual technology. The only thing we've got to be aware of with all TTL, never mind if it's speed light or studio flash or whatever it would be, basically it is guessing through the exposure overall of the scene and where we're actually putting the exposure spot and things really. So you've got to be aware that as you kind of move back out of a scene or move in close in a scene to a subject, you could get slight variation in the actual exposure, a slight variation. On the other hand, if I was photographing a black cat in snow close up, any flash in TTL mode would basically identify the cat away from the snow, and it would illuminate basically the cat more. So in other words, it would give me good shadow exposure as well. As I step further and further away from that black cat in white snow, basically the flash and the exposure on camera thinks this exposure has been achieved, and that's because of the reflectancy of the actual light coming off the actual snow. So it's technically nothing to do with the flash. It's more about the TTL technology and the way that it talks to each other. In exactly the same way, if I basically had a white mouse in a coal cellar, as I'm basically further and further away, basically the flash would be increased and increased trying to get detail in the black, whereas I'm close up on the mouse, it would actually give me the perfect exposure. So be aware of the TTL kind of technologies. One of the other things that you can do with the actual Elinchrom ONE, it is touchscreen on the back. So I can kind of go ahead and actually change the different groups to what I want them to be, okay? I'll just let Brandon kind of zoom in on that for a minute. So it's touchscreen just actually on here, so I can actually change the groups just by going from left to right. I can also basically change the actual exposure on the flash manually. In TTL mode, of course, it's going to take care of this. So basically, the only other real kind of benefit is in the kind of the speed mode. So this will allow you to shoot in a slightly higher shutter speed if you so need. Now, in the likes of boudoir photography, I'm moving around, but the subject is pretty still. So really no need for speed there, all right? But in the likes of dance photography, perhaps you might want to actually freeze the subject, and with dog photography a little bit more, and that's obviously what this will allow us to do. Anyway, enough from me. Let's bring Kelsey onto set and we'll get some shots done. So we've set it up really simple for you today, as far as we've got our usual kind of bed. Hello, Kels. Set up our usual bed, and we've got a light just buried just behind screen, and that's going to kind of give us our kind of wash of light and things really. Let's just do a test shot. Remember, we're in TTL mode. let me just, okay, Kelsey, if you lay back down for me, please, darling. Let's stretch the hands quite high up. Let's roll the hips to me just a little bit, please, darling. That's lovely. And looking the head back towards the other direction. So with basically the first shot is our test shot no matter what. You can see the TTL is doing an excellent job. If you found that it was overexposing some of the flesh, then you need to obviously use the technology on the top of the Elinchrom Skyport Plus here. So we definitely need one of these. I'll let him to focus in on that for a minute. Yeah. Are you there? Yeah. Okay. So in that one, we can see it's group 1. Let me just bring it live again. And basically you can see it's plus 2.7. If I turn that down to 0 for a minute. Okay. So it's down to 0 now. Let's see the working exposure. Shooting exactly the same image, but with no compensation. Let's stretch those hands again, just so we mimic it. Relax. So here we're looking to actually, is there underexposure? You can see already there is, because basically it's seeing itself, a bit like I pre-explained, that it's seeing something quite universally exposed correctly. We've got some darkness, some lightness, we've got the big dark cupboard. So basically the exposure it thinks is correct, whereas in fact we're looking to give some specularity and sharpness to the lighting onto the subject itself. It was probably seeing the highlight in the drapes behind here and the highlight on the bed and going, whoa, I've got enough exposure. Whereas we know we're not photographing for the bed, we're actually photographing for the subject on the bed, okay? If I went in close and I did the same shot perhaps, do the same shot please, darling, keep it. Let me just refocus, that'll help Mark, keep it. So as I start to fill up the frame more, it will start to actually see the exposure in a slightly different way. And the reason I've kind of shooting in black and white today, you know most of my boudoir is black and white photography anyway, but it's also a good way to actually see the tonality of greys and blacks and whites within the image. So even though we've got an exposure pretty good on the face here, it's lacking that little bit of specularity and needs a little bit more exposure. And if we kind of went in here, it's pretty missing about a stop of exposure no matter what, because it's seeing all this white. If we were photographing on a black bed, okay, it would be a totally different exposure then. It would give us that little bit more. So in this case, we're just coming on to the EL Skyport again. Wrong camera. EL Skyport again, you'll focus in a minute. Sorry, Brand. Okay, and we're just going to kind of push this up in power, and you can see that going up to its stop. One stop and a third, 1 stop and 2/3, 2 stops. So let's just go 1 stop and a third, because I pretty much think that's where it is, okay? And then as far as the modeling bulb, I just switched that off, all right? Just from here, I want it on. I always like to actually work with a modeling bulb on anyway. And then basically just pressing on the group to go back to where I want, and then pretty much I'm ready to go. So now, if I do the same shot with that increased exposure, in other words, we're increasing the exposure by telling the technology, a little bit more please with that hand above again, we're telling the technology to add some more light please, yes? So then we start to see that, now you can kind of see the difference of the photograph. All right, so if you're in TTL mode, I would much prefer to get nearer to the working exposure, perfect, than I would to actually have to fix everything in Photoshop to begin with. But remember what I was saying to you, as we kind of move away and closer up to an image, at times that exposure can change even without the flash having any control, because the technical part is being told by the camera when to switch on and off and things really. So we're pretty much into a great working exposure on the right hand side here. Okay, so let's just shoot, yeah. So the benefit now is, let me just shoot that again. So, and again, babe. Let's do onto the face with the exposure. Okay, so I've told it now that's the kind of this slight overexposure that I want, yes. But if you can see on the screen, basically my aperture is 1.4. Now, some of you will kind of really love that daring kind of aperture, but I really want to shoot somewhere around about f4, and pretty much this flash has enough capabilities to do it. So all I did there, if you notice, was basically change the aperture on camera and basically allowed the technique, or the technology, I should say, to actually change the actual exposure. So in other words, it said, okay, he's now moved from f1.4 to now f4. It means he needs a lot more light, and we're going to measure, but we're going to still consistently give him 1.3 or 1.7, whatever that compensation I gave to give him the working scenario all the time with it. So from here, basically now, I'll just come off tripod for a minute, or studio stand for a minute. I can now kind of just go through my normal kind of shot and images, and it doesn't matter if I'm photographing with the light or against the light, I can basically get the image done. So you can see that there is the consistency of exposure running through no matter what with it. So as we change the kind of image, it's going to work with us. Babe, if you just jump off there for a minute, I'm just going to get you against this cupboard. Is that okay? If you walk around, I'll push this. Just get you, if you go right near that edge and push your hands onto the cupboard for me, come up to me a little bit more, a little bit more. That's great. And just lean in. We'll go faceless, so let's lose the face fully, yeah? So again, in the same way, and relax, we're using the same technology, but again, of course, here, it's really beginning to fight and give us more kind of light in, perhaps. If I want more light there, I just go back into the exposure once more and basically increase my power, the overpowering, the compensation here more. Let's go back to it. Let's do the same pose, please. So I've just gone from plus 1.3 to plus plus 3 stops, yeah? And the reason being is that I've now brought this flash into the image. So it was seeing itself and it would cut down quickly. If I go in and do the tight shot once more, please, honey. Keep it. So I've knocked the flash out of the photograph now. You can see already how it's lightened up even more. So thinking about how you overcompensate the flashes and so on will depend on what we're actually trying to achieve as far as the image is concerned. Let's just turn our back to here, please. Your back fully onto the cupboard. That's lovely. Let's pop the hands up quite high. That's lovely, looking down towards the floor. So we're not going to have any light onto Kelsey's face. Okay, so it's kind of almost a semi-silhouette, but we've got this lovely light kind of coming through actually on into the body. But remember, in the same way, is when I start to actually turn against here, let's turn the body to that way a little bit. Let's actually looking out towards here. Let's use one hand to the strap here and the other hand to the little bit of fiddle in there. That's it. Looking down to the floor, I think, darling. Keep it there. Yep. So remember that there are times where you're moving to a position where now all of a sudden you're creating your own problem because the speed light technology, in other words, the TTL technology, even though it's being used in the likes of studio flash, is overpowering things. This is once more where we've got to go back in and dial down our power. So if you can see on here, we're at 1.3. Switch it on again. Okay, and really what I want it to do is basically turn that back down to the 1.3 we had before. Okay, so we only turn that to the 3 stops, the compensation 3 stops, because we were going to be seeing the flash within the image itself. Let's do the same thing. And relax, darling, just while I show the 2 varieties on screen. So we can see that here, it's still too much, agreed? We've got too much flash coming through. It's still trying to actually kind of reduce down. We've turned that flash. Let me just check I did the technology correct. Oh, I did. So I can basically go back to my group again. Let's turn that down to 0, and let's see if we can get it right again. Let's do it, keep it. And I'm just going to focus in on the body. Relax. Okay, the difference being, okay, is here. The focus spot in the exposure on shot 1 was here. The focus spot on shot 2 was here. So remember, when you're turning up and down flash compensation, in other words, remember to have the focus spot on where you want the exposure to be from, if possible. Otherwise, what you're going to end up with is technique that you know you're trying to do correctly. You're moving flash power up and down, down. But basically, as you go to take the photograph, you focus, say, here, and then you move the composition for focus with it, and then you end up basically not getting the type of image that you're trying to achieve. So the Elinchrom ONE, absolutely great technology for a studio photographer or a photographer who's working on location, whether it's out on a beach or in a bedroom with it. Some great technology there, but it's about understanding the technology. But don't be afraid to break the technology as well. One of the great things about Elinchrom is that they always make sure, as a pro photographer, you can reset everything into a manual mode. In other words, we know what we're doing. We can meter things, or we can set a consistent exposure from basically taking a sample on the histogram itself or whatever it is. So absolutely a thumbs up from Mark Cleghorn here about using the Elinchrom ONE so far. But remember, this is my first day and only my second time I've shot with it. So yeah, enjoy it. I'm going to get some more shots done. Take care. Bye-bye.